Sega's home consoles were terrific, but what happens when you play the old games on a much newer console? I am the Game Collector, and this is Second Opinion Games, and today I put Sega up against the Xbox 360.
Second Opinion Games.
Starting off with a little Sega Rally Championship on the Dreamcast. It looks, well, kind of bad for a Dreamcast game. I know the Dreamcast was known for its own specific style, but I don't like how they use the graphics in this game. But what's worse is the controls. They are slippery as all get out, and my car just sort of flies all over the place. I'd much rather be playing Sega Rally Championship 95 on the Sega Saturn. Here the graphics are noticeably worse, but they do have that Sega Saturn charm. But the controls are spot on, and this is an incredible racing experience, and it's hard to believe they even managed to get this game to work on the Sega Saturn. Over on the Xbox 360, we have Sega Rally Online Arcade, and this feels like a beautiful arcade port. The graphics are noticeably hyped up to an extreme degree, and the controls are almost spot on. Now, you can say the Sega Saturn version of the game controls a little bit better, but I completely also understand if you take the opposite and say the 360 controls better. It just depends on what type of racing games you're used to playing. However, both of them are very enjoyable. And when it comes all down to it, I'm gonna say the Xbox 360 here has the better game. There's more tracks, more stuff to do, and you could play it online. I don't think you can do it now so much, or at least I can't. Any way you look at it, Saturn or the 360, they're both great racing experiences. Maybe not so much on the Dreamcast. Radiant Silvergun on the Sega Saturn is one of the best shooters that were ever made. Now this, of course, is a Japanese exclusive Sega Saturn game, and it is meant for anyone who has clearly mastered the shoot-'em-up genre, because you really have to keep control of your ship and know what you're doing at all times. There is tons of weapons to choose from, and they're all opened from the very start of the game. And knowing when to use each of these weapons is what the whole game is all about. Now, when I play it on the Xbox 360, the game is noticeably even more beautiful, and the controls seem to fit the controller even a little bit better. I can't decide. I don't know which system I'd rather play it on. I guess the Xbox 360, just so I don't have to spend $500 freaking on a copy on the Sega Saturn. Of course, the Sega Saturn, you can burn your own copy on CD, which is what I did in order to play this game. And then with some help of a little extra hardware on the back of my console, I am able to play it itself, and you could always take that route. However, for the very low price of the game on the Xbox Live Arcade, well, you might as well pick it up because you're in for a great shoot-'em-up experience, and it's probably about the best it will ever get here. Rocket Knight Adventures on the Sega Genesis is just an amazing piece of art because of how they pushed the console to do things that it shouldn't have been able to do from the start. If you would have made this a launch title, people would have freaked the heck out. As a standalone game, it was still extremely impressive at the time, showing that it was giving the Super Nintendo a real run for its money. On the Xbox 360, we have a decent version of this game. It's not the same game. This is meant to be a spiritual sequel, sort of like how New Super Mario Bros. Is different from Super Mario Bros. 1. Does it retain a lot of the same fun? Absolutely. Are the graphics cleaned up and beautiful and better than the Sega Genesis? Abso-freaking-lutely. But which one would I rather play? Well, I'm going to keep coming back to the Sega Genesis game, if not for just the one big flaw on the Xbox 360. How about the fact that the screen doesn't scroll like it's supposed to? Like when you get so close to the top of the screen, you think it would automatically go up or down so you could actually see where you're trying to rocket knight yourself. In this game, it just doesn't seem to do that. I understand it's what it's trying to do to make the game a little bit more challenging, but why can't it just show my character in the center of the game with maybe a little bit of leeway so it's not snapping the camera back and forth? It's much more enjoyable on the Sega Genesis, but both are terrific games. Here's one that's a total wash, but I feel like I had to bring it up. The Sega Vintage Collection. You have Alex Kidd on the Sega Master System. It plays just like the Master System version because this is just running complete emulation here. So if you prefer on the Master System, I completely understand. However, on the Xbox 360, it does have a couple of unlockables and achievements, so you could see some concept art and whatnot. You also have Shinobi, which plays exactly like the Sega Genesis version, and it looks, well, kind of good. It's fun to play. And you also have Hang On, which was on the arcade, which of course I don't have a giant motorcycle in my living room, so getting the full enjoyment out of this game is something that I can't do. It's also arcade hard, so you're probably never going to see the end of it. Maybe you can find a better version emulating it somewhere else on your computer, maybe? But what this all comes down to is, what system would you rather be playing it on? I think the original system would be better because the controller seems to fit each system, except for Super Hang-On, of course. Nights in the Dreams was a more interesting experience. It was a must-have game for the Sega Saturn, where you play as this character Knights, who has to collect blue orbs, fly into some type of octopus structure, and then blow it up with your blue orbs. It doesn't need to make a lot of sense because this is all based on a child's dream. One of two childs, matter of fact. There is a boy and a girl, and both their storylines seem to meet in the middle a little bit, and there's plenty of replayability here because the bosses, you have to figure out how to defeat them, and with the tight time limit there, you are just struggling to try and see exactly what you're supposed to do, which is also a point that infuriated me as a kid, but now I completely understand what they were going for. The 2.5D art style is something that is gorgeous even to this day, and when I played it on the Xbox 360, I got to go through the Sega Saturn version there, which was cleaned up a lot, and they added some borders, and the controls are spot on. However, you could also play the Xbox 360 version of it here, which is what I recommend everyone does because the graphics here are completely beautiful. Now, they did make another Knights game for the Wii, and it looks ugly and crappy. Why couldn't they just stick with this art style and do more of this? This is probably the very best version of Knights you will ever be able to play, and because I don't know of any sequel coming out anytime soon, this is a must-have for anybody who loves Sega and Knights. We also got Guardian Heroes on the Xbox Live, which they completely remade the game. They didn't add good voice acting, sadly, and this is one of those action beat-em-up style games that also has music and really tight controls. One of the things I liked about the Xbox 360 version is that they added a whole move list so you could actually see what moves are at your disposal, because this is sort of like a fighting game at its heart in the form of a beat-em-up. The graphics here are beautiful, but if you don't want to play with more beautiful graphics, you could also play the Sega Saturn version on the very same game. However, when I played it up against a real Sega Saturn, I noticed that they made the Sega Saturn version actually look uglier than when played on the actual physical Sega Saturn itself. So I don't really know what they were doing here. Also, this happens to be one of the most expensive Saturn games out there, and I do still think that it plays better on the Xbox 360, so it's a no-brainer for me, play it on the Xbox 360. Unless you have one of those cheat devices which lets you break the game, in which case then you'll probably have a more fun time playing it on the Sega Saturn. Either way, you can't go wrong, but the 360 just has the edge on this one. Strider for the Sega Genesis. Right away, I wanted to give the win to the Genesis here, and it seemed like I had rose-colored glasses on this one. I love the arcade version, and I really thought I loved this version until I noticed all of the errors and weird things that it just does. Also, the controls aren't quite right. I know I used to beat this game all the time as a kid, and now I have a hard time doing anything on it. Maybe it's just because it's not meant for grown-ups. Maybe it's meant for kids. I don't know. And it's still a good time here, but my God, I'd rather be playing it on, the PlayStation 1 because they had a great arcade port there, and not the Sega Genesis because there's just too many glitches, too much crap going on, too many bad enemy placements, and the game just seems to fail. On the Xbox 360, it is a completely different game. Matter of fact, when I first started playing, I thought it was mixed in with a whole lot of Sonic the Hedgehog because my guy was running so fast, which does sound cool, Strider and Sonic the Hedgehog mixed together, but it wasn't what I was actually hoping to be playing. No, this is a Metroidvania style game, and I don't really have time for that right now, but you know what? This is an amazing experience. I wish I had the time to play through this one because the graphics are unbelievably awesome and the controls make you feel like some type of super ninja from the future, and that's just your starting base level character. You only get stronger as the game progresses. So I cannot wait to come back to this, and I'd much rather be playing on the Xbox 360. Afterburner on the Sega 32X might not be the best version of this game, but I wanted to talk about the 32X because it just sits there collecting dust most of the time in the corner of my closet, and what you got here is a pretty decent arcade port of the game. Flying your ship around, knocking out enemy fighters, moving way too fast to actually be in any sort of control of what's going on, and sometimes you'll trigger the screen to go flippy, doing a barrel roll, or at least what we call barrel rolls. I know it's really not the term, but that's not here or there. What you do have is a really fun game. And I thought the Xbox wasn't going to compare to this, and I was right, because Afterburner Climax does not compare to this at all, because this game is a heck of a lot more fun. First of all, it is gorgeous, and I mean gorgeous. And you have this climax button, which it doesn't do exactly what you might think. Get that out of your mind, you sicko. It just fires off a bunch of missiles and kills everything on the screen. Filling up that climax bar is really easy to do, unlike with my wife itself, and you will have a great time with this one. Just trust me. There's also branching paths, and there's more than one aircraft to control, which means you have extra replayability here. When it comes down to it, I have to go with the climax every time. Vigilante 8 Arcade on the 360. This is one of those car combat style games, and I could not be more psyched to play this one. Now, this seems to be the first game of the series, so you could also play this on the Nintendo 64, and you'd rather probably be playing on the Nintendo 64 than this. Even though it looks kind of good, it is filled with glitches everywhere. This is nearly unplayable. Your cars are hard to control, and it's really hard to do anything in this game in general. And I think that the playstyle is pretty much terrible. Vigilante 8 Second Offense on the Dreamcast sure doesn't look as nice, and it's not without its glitches as well, but still has tons more Easter eggs and little things to find going on the map, and it has good car combat, or at least a heck of a lot better than on the 360. I'd rather be playing the Dreamcast any day of the week over this monstrosity that I see on the Xbox 360, so please pick up the game for the Dreamcast. Second Offense was a much better game. I don't know why they tried to remake the first one to begin with. It's really not that interesting. The best thing about it is the control scheme seems to show you which buttons to hit for your weapons. Other than that, I just stay away from it. This game is kind of crap. Earthworm Jim was remade on the 360 too, and this looks like a gorgeous version of the Sega Genesis classic Earthworm Jim. It plays almost exactly the same, only now you can see the very full screen because you're playing on a modern television and not a square CRT. Rectangles just show more screen. It's something that happens. Now, one thing I love about Earthworm Jim is how far it pushed the console. Does it push the Xbox 360? Absolutely not. It doesn't do anything extra with the hardware other than cleaning up the graphics. That's why I would give the win to the Sega Genesis. Not for the first Earthworm Jim, no, for the second one, because Earthworm Jim 2 is so over the top, does so much more stuff, and it is a far better experience to be playing than the first game because they went with that weirdness that is Earthworm Jim and took it to all new levels. This is the game they should have remade. Maybe they wanted to just slow roll it and then never got around to it. I don't know, but we really need a good remake of Earthworm Jim 2, and that's why the Genesis gets to win here. Okay, so one thing about me is I am a huge Contra fan. So when I saw Hard Corps Uprising on the Xbox 360, I was blown away and had to jump right into it just to find out that it plays not like I expected. It's sort of hard for me to get into. Your character isn't as maneuverable as I thought they would be, and they seem to look like they're moving quite slow. It's also Contra hard, which means you are gonna get your butt beat. However, when you try to play a couple times, you'll find that it's actually really good, and the fact that it gives you credits for beating levels, which means you could go back and power up your characters, so the more you play, also, the better you get. Now, sure, you could be good enough to play through this entire game without upgrading anything at all. However, that's not the case for most people, and not the case for most Contra players. So I thought this was really unique. Also, of course, the game is gorgeous, and it gives you multiple characters to play through as. So I was ready to hand over that win to the 360 immediately. Contra Hard Corps for the Sega Genesis is clearly the answer to Contra 3 on the Super Nintendo. Sadly, I was a major Super Nintendo fanboy by this time, so I barely got a chance to play this game. And I say sadly because I freaking love this. There is some branching paths here, there's a good and bad ending, and there are multiple characters, each with their own weapons, in order to push you through the game really fast. There's cheat codes here to give you extra lives, of course, which you're going to need every single one of them, at least the very first time you play through the game. And then you want to play through again, and then you want to destroy it again, and this is one of the most addictive Contra experiences I have ever played. Right alongside the first Contra game, Super C, and Contra 3 The Alien Wars itself. I might not put it as high as The Alien Wars just because of how much I love that game, but I completely understand that over time, I will probably grow to love this one even more just because of how many levels I have to play through and enjoy. This is one of the coolest games I ever seen. It seemed to push the Genesis hardware in ways that very few Genesis games did, and it has one of the best Contra experiences of all times, crushing the Xbox 360 version. Even if it isn't as pretty, it's one of the best games ever made. And yes, even though the Xbox 360 isn't a real competitor to these Sega consoles, you might still want to give it a try for some of these epic Sega experiences that you might have missed out on, because sometimes they're better than the original. Of course, you just might want to keep on going back to Contra on the Genesis. But of course, that's just my opinion. Thanks for watching.
Well done.
Hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. I had a great time making it. That means the Xbox 360 had 2 wins in a row. One over the Atari, which is a bit of a no-brainer, and again over Sega. I wonder how Nintendo will do when I get around to making that video. Well, let me know what you think in the comments down below. And until later, I will see you again, guys.